Star Trek, the motion picture. Star Trek, the motionless picture. God, I hate that term. Really, I do. If there's any movie in the entire franchise that gets undeservedly dumped on, it's this one. No one ever talks about Star Trek V or Insurrection or Nemesis quite the way they do this first film. I've heard all the complaints, from the long, drawn-out scenes to characters being written out of character, to the uniforms looking like pajamas, to it feeling like an episode stretched into a movie. And are there some legitimate complaints? Absolutely. But despite its flaws, I love this movie. In fact, I'm willing to go as far as to say that it is my second favorite Star Trek film. So I thought for the first episode of Retrophilia, with the latest and greatest Abramverse Star Trek movie coming out in theaters later this month, that I would go take a look at Star Trek the motion picture and rise to its defense. I'm going to address some of those issues people find fault with and make what I hope are some effective rebuttals to their complaints. Now, I had originally meant to go into a history of how this movie got made, but hell, you can Wikipedia that easily enough. Instead, let's just dive right into it. Okay, so let's tackle the least of the complaints, the uniforms. What's the biggest complaint? They look like pajamas. Which uniforms look like pajamas? The standard duty uniforms? I'm not seeing it. Sure, they look bland, I'll give you that. Maybe they could have chosen colors other than beige and gray and white and brown. But you know who else wears bland colors? Yeah, these guys. So I think maybe the costume designers were trying to go for a more military feel. But I think the medical uniforms look sharp, and Kirk's Admiral uniform looks pretty nice. And take a look at the short sleeve variant. That looks pretty decent. I like the engineering radiation suits. They make sense. I like the field jackets. They're a callback to the television series' first pilot. I love the look of the spacesuits. They look rugged and realistic. Hey, and look at that. The security guys actually get to wear protective armor. And then they're the utility jumps. Christ, man, had to think this was a rated G movie. Is that a phaser in your pants, Decker, or are you just glad to see Kirk? Yeah, alright, I didn't need to see that. The jumpsuits could have been redesigned a bit better. And look at this guy. They take Casual Friday really seriously on the Epsilon 9 listening post. And you know what? This is where all that pajama bullshit comes from. This one guy is wearing this one uniform, and every hater has been dumping on this movie ever since. If I have one nit to pick in regards to uniforms, it's that there is a little too much diversity going on. If you look at the recreation deck scene where the entire crew is gathered, it really feels like everyone is wearing their own personal uniform, suggesting there are a lot of variants. Sulu has his own uniform, some random guy in the crowd has this thing with a zipper up the front, another guy, I don't know, that might be what space janitors wear. Maybe the producers were going with the idea that in the future Starfleet is not purely military, so the dress code is more relaxed and the crew have more options. I just think they could have had Sulu and a couple other crew members wearing the same stuff. Now let's talk about the plot. Thing
Why is any object we don't understand always called a thing?
of immense size and power is heading straight for Earth for some unknown purpose. Its defensive energy field is powerful enough to obliterate starships with ease. Enterprise is the only ship in the region that has a prayer of intercepting the craft and dealing with it, even though it has spent 18 months in dry dock, undergoing a major refit. Admiral Kirk has wrested command of Enterprise from Captain Decker, and with his crew has gone to intercept the thing.
Why is any object we don't understand always called a thing?
Spock, with motives of his own, arrives to aid Kirk and company in their quest. What follows then is a showdown between Enterprise and an entity they come to know as V'ger. There are many complaints regarding the plot and pacing of the film. Originally, this movie started off as the pilot for Star Trek Phase 2, the unproduced 70s television series. And I think maybe that's where some of those complaints stem from. People heard this story and they jumped right onto it saying, see, I knew it. Sure, this plot could have been told in a 45-minute episode, if you remove the Klingons getting slaughtered at the beginning of the film, if you remove Spock's subplot entirely, if you remove Decker and Ilea's love story, if we removed all the bits where the gang is getting back together. The point is, there's a lot going on in this film, and I think people saying it is just an overglorified pilot is doing it a disservice. Now, some people have claimed that the plot is derivative of the Star Trek episode The Changeling. For those of you who don't know, The Changeling is the one where the Enterprise comes across a probe of immense power that mistakes Kirk for its creator. It turns out aliens found two damaged probes, one from Earth and combine them so now that this probe, Nomad, flies around space looking for new life forms and sterilizing them. It's true there is something similar in the motion picture's plot, but I think there's enough different that you can't say the motion picture is ripping off an original series episode. At least this time the computer wasn't talked to death. Apparently Decker had sex with it, or something. I think Kirk was envious. This is not the first time Star Trek has borrowed from other source material. One of my favorite episodes is Balance of Terror, where Enterprise faces off against a Romulan vessel armed with a devastating weapon and a cloaking device. The plot borrows pretty heavily from the World War II movie The Enemy Below. Heck, J.J. Abrams' Star Trek movie pretty much borrowed the plot from Star Wars, the wide-eyed farm boy drawn into space by a grizzled veteran, dealing with a planet-destroying superweapon. Me, I forgive plot similarities provided I am sufficiently entertained, and where the motion picture is concerned, I was. But what else I like about the movie is the gang getting back together. Imagine you, Firefly fans, if after your show went off the air, you had no means to watch it other than at the whims of syndicated television and at annual conventions where fans would bring in copies to air along with blooper reels. After 10 years of this being the only way you could enjoy Firefly, other than maybe the Firefly role-playing game, okay, and maybe the really cheesy Firefly cartoon series, which, as much fun as it was, just wasn't the same, you got yourself a movie. For the first time in a decade, you got to see your old friends in their old roles. And this is what the motion picture is to people like me. I loved the original animated series as a kid, growing up with them on television, seeing the same episodes over and over again. It was a thrill to see the crew reunited. Is it me being unabashedly nostalgic? You're damn right. There have been some complaints regarding the special effects in this movie, that some of it looks, well, bad. Maybe people who are critical of the special effects aren't thinking about how it looked then rather than how it looks now, stacked up against modern special effects. This wormhole scene, for example. Trust me, back then, it looked cool. The photon torpedoes? It's a nice special effect that stands up to this day, in my opinion. The transporter sequences were done pretty well, and they're a nice upgrade from the original series. And look at the probe. It looks awesomely alien as it travels around the bridge messing with stuff. And then you look at the model work in this movie. They do some wonderful things with them. Okay, the little television in the pod, yeah, I can't see that flying with moviegoers even back in '79. Now, I've heard some comparisons between this film and Star Wars, and it's not very fair. It's comparing apples and oranges. The only thing the two films have in common, special effects-wise, I think, is the model work, and they stack up pretty well. But Star Wars had nothing like the wormhole effect, unless you count that quick cut of the Millennium Falcon to hyperspace, and Star Trek didn't have lightsabers. Now let's talk about characterization. People have complained about characters behaving, well, out of character. Namely Kirk. This is not the high priestess seducing swashbuckler from the original series, but a ruthless, bitter man willing to stab his protege in the back to get whatever he wants. And you know what? I'm entirely fine with this. This movie takes place about 2 years after the end of the Enterprise's 5-year voyage, and Kirk is a different person. He has accepted a promotion he now regrets, and he now has used a crisis to forward his own goals. Kirk is just not nice. People do not need to be nice to be interesting. Is Kirk in this role interesting? To me, he is. Think about the way Shatner played him in the original series. Confident, almost cocky. Here he's unsure. He's on a ship that is unknown to him despite all his pretensions. In Decker, he sees a younger version of himself who bears a justifiable grudge. In the first act, when the ship falls into a wormhole, it's not Kirk that saves the day, but Decker. It's not until Enterprise reaches V'ger that he is once more on familiar ground. There is a crisis before him, Spock is at the science station, and all is right with the universe. And even so, we have a Decker questioning his judgment, especially in the face of Ilea's death. Maybe when people watch this movie, they're expecting a different sort of Kirk. They want the tunic-torn, two-fisted striking seducer of green Orient women. They don't want their heroes growing old. Kirk's attitude and actions, while sometimes reprehensible, are understandable. He's a man who's accepted a promotion for one reason or another, and he now regrets it. He seeks to regain that which he has lost. Who among us who isn't 15 years old hasn't looked back at a decision in their lives and wish they could have done it differently? In Kirk's case, he sees an opportunity to get Enterprise back, and he takes it. Is it selfish? Yeah, but it's human, and I don't need my heroes to be perfect to root for them. And what about Spock? Cold, unemotional, he's on board Enterprise to forward his own ends, to find this mysterious consciousness that may hold the answers he seeks. And again, I have no problem with this. Sure, it would have been nice to find out why Spock was pursuing the Kolinar ritual, why he thought it was necessary to purge all emotions. Did something happen in the last 2 years of the 5-year voyage? It would have been nice to get some backstory, sure. But this flick already clocks in at well over 2 hours. Sacrifices had to be made. Regardless of why Spock decided to do what he did, the purpose was to give him a story arc that tied in with V'ger's. Spock thought the Kolinar ritual held all his answers, and instead he discovered that once meeting V'ger, he had it right all along. So we've covered the plot, special effects, costumes, characterization. What's left? Pacing. And I got nothing. Say what you will about George Lucas today, but back in the day, the man knew his stuff. He could provide the spectacle, but he understood pacing, and Weiss failed completely in that regard. There's this entire scene where Spock arrives via shuttle, and it's a technically wonderful sight to behold, but it's also completely unnecessary, and that 2 minutes could have been cut. Have Chekhov meet Spock at the door. He already said a shuttle showed up. Is the scene with Kirk and Scotty approaching Enterprise necessary? Absolutely. Fans needed to see the old girl in all her glory, and we needed to get a feel for just how much it meant for Kirk to see her again. But counting from the time the pod leaves the orbital office complex to it docking with Enterprise takes 5 minutes. Do we need those scenes of V'ger's interior? Yes, we do. The idea was to provide an alien landscape and to provide a sense of scale. But I can't help but think that if they had just trimmed a minute here or there, just a little tweaking, then maybe, just maybe, the film would not have earned the reputation it has. Let's close out by discussing what the motion picture has given the Trek universe as a whole. Recycled footage. Wrath of Khan had a limited budget, and to help cut costs, producer Harv Bennett and director Nicholas Meyer used several clips from the motion picture, including the Klingons attacking V'ger, the shuttle pod connecting with Enterprise, and Enterprise leaving dry dock. This allowed the movie to come in under budget and paved the way for more Star Trek movies. Recycled costumes. The radiation suits used in the motion picture would be seen again in Wrath of Khan, as did the space suits. Recycled score. The motion picture's main theme was used in a watered-down form for Star Trek The Next Generation. Also, the awesome Klingon theme had inspired composers for years when it came to defining these signature aliens, even up to First Contact, when Worf is in command of Defiant as she makes an attack run on the Borg cube. Klingon ridges. For better or worse, the Klingons received a major makeover in the motion picture, along with both their makeup and costume. It is a look that has endured throughout the course of Trek's film and television history. Whether I persuaded you or not as to the merits of the motion picture, at the very least I hope I have addressed its perceived flaws and noted how most of them have been blown out of proportion. Saying odd-numbered Star Trek movies are bad is a sweeping generalization, and it's undeserved where Star Trek 1 and 3 are concerned. Are they Wrath of Khan? No movie is Wrath of Khan, but neither should they be tossed in the trash bin with Star Trek 5. I hope that if I did not convince you, then that at least I entertained. Thank you for watching.
When I was